Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today I want to talk about compression. It's something that a lot of people wrestle with. I know that I certainly wrestled with it for years, learning how to apply it properly to audio signals, both using it as a guitar-based, effects pedal, learning how to make this sound good with the guitar and not become something that was a noise generator or made things sound too artificial. And also, of course, in the recording environment, there's a number of different uses in the recording environment, of course. You can use it up front to make sure that you're maintaining a smooth level throughout the recording process, and then you can use it on the back end. Of course, you have to get your tracks leveled or compressed or finalized, however you want to, whatever terminology you want to use, to make sure that your audio signal isn't peaking and dropping too much so that the listener isn't caught off guard. It's kind of difficult to decide exactly where to start with compression, but right up front here, I'm just going to talk about a general aesthetic that I go for with compression. I think compression is absolutely essential to getting good audio captures and good studio, ready tracks in music production. However, I think that overusing compression or using it as a crutch is a huge mistake. You want to keep the dynamics in your music. If you use too much compression, you will squash the music. You will actually, kind of ruin all the beauty that's happening within the room if you chop off too many of the highs and you artificially boost too many of the lows as far as volume, as far as, the dynamic range of the music. That's where performance comes in, proper mic placement, speaking in an even tone as I am now, so that I don't have to over-rely upon the compressor to just fix things and make everything perfect along the way. All right, I am going to start by showing something that is not officially a compressor. It's a tube leveler that I use out in the shop. And let's just go over really quickly what the difference between a leveler and a compressor is. A leveler is an automatic level control that works just to increase or decrease the volume continuously as a program is being recorded, i.e., my voice in the room, whatever's happening in the room. I use a leveler out in the shop because it's a single microphone setup. It's a very dynamic environment with, I usually have an amplifier going, so I capture everything with one microphone, a condenser mic, with this tube leveler to try to keep everything under control. A compressor basically has a threshold that is set, and then it lowers volumes, resulting in a more even sound. So if you're getting volume spikes, the compressor is there to do that. Whereas a limiter or a leveler, which are sometimes seen as kind of the same thing, works just to keep that consistency, across the board throughout the program. All right, so it's not just catching spikes, it's actually manipulating the entire program as it goes. All right, but we are going to use my Summit Tube Leveler as a starting point with compression because this is a relatively simple mono unit. The controls are very much akin to a compressor. We'll be going over my Pro VLA here in a few minutes. I'll put a picture up of the settings on it, and we'll go over some of the finer points of compression. But basically, what I like to do is I like to make sure that the compressor is obviously engaged and doing its job, but I don't want to hear it. I don't want there to be too much noise. And that all starts right here with your input gain. So you want to obviously have what in all of this also, I should say really quickly before you think that I'm just talking about outboard gear, these same principles will all apply to the in-the-box things that you're using on your computer or, a plug-in, whatever. It's all the same concept. So your input gain, if it's too hot, you're going to end up with noise. You're going to end up with, the compressor's going to be kind of like pumping and trying to, it's going to be grabbing stuff. And it's just, if your signal's too hot, it's just not a good thing. So you want to find that sweet spot like you do when you're setting levels for recording of, being in that yellow zone rather than being all the way down in the green or all the way up in the red. So once you get that figured out, Then you want to move over to the mystery parts of compression, which are not a mystery at all once you really think about them. They're super easy. Attack. What attack means, I have my attack set to fast, and I always use fast attack on pretty much everything that, all my compressors. I want whatever is coming through that's setting a spike to be grabbed as quickly as possible and brought down. So I always set my attacks on compressors on fast. That way, you know, you're not going to get a little bit of it creeping through before it gets brought back down. And then you have your release, which is how quickly the compressor lets go of whatever the signal, you know, the signal that is spiked, how fast it lets go of it. I set that to slow. So what I'm going over here is just basically, these are default settings that I think are a good starting point for a set it and forget it compressor paradigm for you. A lot of people who wrestle with compression will experiment endlessly with the idea of attack and release. I have found that fast attack, slow release seems to give the least audible result when you're using compression, because I don't want to hear things moving around in the mix. I want it to be smooth. I don't want to notice the compression. If you're noticing compression, it's not good, at least in my opinion. Some people use compressors as an effect. I do not. I just want it to do its job and try to keep those levels nice and steady for the listener so that your final mix sounds good or your capture sounds good. So, fast attack, slow release. I always keep my meters to output. I want to see what's happening with the output. I don't want to see too much movement on those meters. I just want to see them, you know, gently doing their job, and hopefully your source material isn't crazy spiking. And if it is, you will see, you know, you'll see it if you set that to input. You'll see it like moving back and forth pretty wildly. I like to just watch the output to make sure that it's staying nice and steady and that the compressor is doing its job and I'm not getting a bunch of high spikes or, you know, weird transients coming through. And then finally, on most compressors, levelers, limiters, whatever, you'll have an output makeup gain. By going through the compression process, you are going to end up losing some volume. You also want to be careful with your makeup gain. If you start cranking that too high, or you find that you have to, you may want to revisit your input to make sure that it is hot enough, because you can also introduce noise if you crank your makeup gain too high. All right, so that is the Summit Tube Leveler. I will have a picture of it up just momentarily. It probably already came by, and it just shows the settings that I use out in the shop with my C1000 condenser mic that I use out there to do all of my audio captures. All right. Now, when I glance over here at my actual studio compressor, so forgive me, I won't be looking at the camera this entire time, we need to talk about something that's very specific to a compressor rather than a limiter, and that is going to be your ratio. Now, ratios are something that I didn't understand for a long time, but it's pretty simple. When you look at a compressor and you see that it has ratio options, what you want to remember is that 1-to-1 means unity. So there will not be much happening. I mean, you're using a compressor pretty much at that point like an EQ or some sort of like a preamp or something. Now, when you go to a 2-to-1 ratio, that means that for every 2 decibels over the threshold, the output increases only by 1. The same thing goes for a 3-to-1. Then if you've got a spike of 3, it will put an output of 1. 4-to-1, you see how this goes. So, as a general, rule of thumb, a 2-to-1 is not going to be introducing much compression at all. You're maintaining all of your dynamic range. A 3-to-1, you are going to get more meaningful compression introduced, but it still should not be audible, and it should still have maintained most of your dynamic range. 4-to-1 and above, you're getting aggressive. And 10 to 1, you're getting into like, really squashing things. You're basically just, you're turning it into a limiter or a leveler at at that point, and it's more of an effect. You're no longer going to be, using it in a completely musical or natural way. My default setting for compression is 3 to 1. I feel like it grabs most of the things I don't want coming through, but maintains my dynamic range in a very pleasing and unnoticeable way. So, let's go over once again these basic settings for your compression. You want to, obviously, the input gain and the makeup gain are going to be to a certain extent to taste, but you want to make sure that you're not introducing noise into the signal chain. All right, so let's go over those settings again. You want a fast attack, you want a slow release, and I advise a 3 to 1 ratio. And then, let's see, what else is there to cover on the basic mechanics of my, what I like about my Pro VLA, which hopefully the picture is up right now or has been, and I'll put it up again right now, is that it's not filled with option paralysis. A lot of times you will have compressors that have every single parameter is going to be on a knob. On my Pro VLA, the attack and release, they're all just push button. There's like fast and slow or automatic, and I like to have as few of those parameters to mess with as possible for myself. Now, you may want to have complete control over everything. The issue, I prefer either a switch or a button so that I can just go fast or slow, or I can go medium or whatever, or auto, and allow them, like on the Pro VLA, it has the auto function, which I find to be very pleasing. It's just a preset. It always seems to work perfectly, and I don't have to sit and fiddle with a knob that has the attack and release on it. I did have the second generation version of this compressor for many years. It had all those parameters on it, and I never got as good a sound out of that one as I do out of this one, just by hitting those auto functions. And you'll probably find the same thing in the digital environment with your plugins, or if you're using a DAW that already has like a proprietary compressor or a number of compressors or limiters built into it. I think that going with default settings a lot of the time is not a bad way to go, rather than overthinking and getting, you can really get in the weeds with compression in a hurry, which is why I wanted to make this video, is kind of cut through a lot of that and just, go, okay, there's a few basic principles I've come across that have worked for me for many, many years now, that have eliminated my anxiety and my option paralysis with using compressors. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about guitar pedals. Compression pedals, compressor pedals are definitely, something that I always have on my board. I find that if I'm doing finger pick sections in the studio, they're satisfying to, kind of even out some of my inconsistencies if I'm finger picking on an electric guitar. I also find that sometimes with solos, with long sustained notes, I will pop this on as more of an effect, where I will crank up the sustain on it, or whatever the threshold, so that it will hold the notes longer. Just makes things a little bit easier. But I always watch my output and my on my guitar compressors, and I keep my attacks fast. I always use compression with a fast attack, because I want it to grab that note as soon as possible. And that's just the, kind of the ways that I have found to use compression in a very satisfying way that is musical, without being overthought, because I did overthink for years. I've ruined many a final mix by overusing compression, either by introducing noise into the signal that I then had to figure out how to route out, but I'm like, but I need that much compression. I was always operating under this assumption that I needed a ton of compression to keep up with everybody else. And then I discovered that if I kept my performances dynamic yet even and steady, that I didn't need as much compression, and I use it with as light a touch as I can now. But those are the basic rules of compression as far as I am concerned. I do hope that for people who are not familiar with compression, that this is helpful, just to give you a place to start. Obviously, this is all very subjective. There are people who will have wildly different opinions about compression. And if you do, please leave it in the comments. I would love to hear it. But these are the things that I have come up with that work for me. And I think that for people who are just getting their feet wet, or who have become completely frustrated, or have had bad results with compression, take a step back. Come back to those basic, ideas that I put forth in the video and see how they work for you. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope that if you've watched to this point, you've hit that subscribe button. Likes and shares are greatly appreciated. And the comment section, blow it up. Did I miss anything that you think is absolutely vital? Or am I doing things in a completely opposite way that you would go about them? I would love to hear it. All right. So hit subscribe. Take care, and we'll see you next time.